A Tortured Rebirth. Written and narrated by Lady Spookaria. When I saw the knife, I knew I wouldn't escape. The street was lit up with flickering lampposts and the distant buzz of lights from people's homes. Why was it so deserted? The normally active street was dead silent. I was walking home from work when a car appeared around the corner. The headlights shone down the empty street, and my primal instincts told me to run. There was nothing outwardly strange about the car. White, a little run down, and with well-worn tires. It hadn't been washed for some time. The dirt coated most of the windscreen, and clearly he had gone off-road more than once. I don't know why my mind hyper-focused on this detail. I had bigger issues to worry about. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. My stomach clenched and I ran, driven by every survival instinct to urge me to push on. He called out to me from his car and I kept going, not answering. He got angry and demanded I speak with him. His voice was distorted, strange, and I didn't stick around to see what was wrong with him. I ignored when my muscles cramped and ached. I needed to get home. I need to get somewhere safe. While the lights were on, there were no cars in the driveways to let me know someone was home. No matter how fast I ran, my house was getting further and further away from me. I heard the car door open this time. He called out to me, again, and I kept running away. I saw the shine of something in his hand, and I knew it was a knife. The small blade pointed out from his hand, ready to strike. The headlights left on, and my shadow was cast over the walkway. It was elongated, distorted as I frantically ran. I screamed. No one came out of their home to help me. Maybe they called the police. I hope they did. How long would it take for them to come? I let out another scream into the night and hoped someone, anyone, would help me. I could feel the cool tears on my hot, flushed face. My breathing was hoarse, raspy breaths as I choked to breathe. I felt his hand around my arm. The sharp yank backward, and I frantically pulled to get away. I remember the harsh smell of alcohol and body odor. He needed some courage in order to take my life from me. All my senses were heightened. I reached up and scratched down his bearded face, pulling away skin and blood in my nails. He yelled something at me. I couldn't make it out, and I screamed at him, striking and attacking him with my hands. Even though it was feeble, I would die tonight. I knew when I saw the blade pierce me that it was over. It didn't hurt like I thought it would. I wasn't going to make it. I still fought. I felt the hot blood on my skin, and instinctively reached down to grip the knife with my hands, causing deep slices into them. My hands were thickly coated in my blood. He pulled my hands out of the way and repeatedly struck me in the stomach. My entrails were pulled out with each violent stab. Again, I struck at him, trying to do as much damage as I possibly could. My movements were feral, wild, blind to whatever happened. He may take my life, but he'll be marked in the process. Maybe someone would notice and he would be punished for it. My fate was sealed, but he would wear those marks as long as he lived. He whispered something under his breath. My head snapped backward from the force of his fist, and I felt the world go black. I heard a slam. Maybe it was the car boot being slammed shut. I don't know. When I woke up, I felt the wet grass move underneath me, and it took me a moment to realize I was being dragged through the mud. Leaves and dirt clung to my hair and clothing. I wanted to pull my shirt down again. I was conscious of my bare stomach and entrails moving over the sharp rocks and twisting roots of trees. I clung onto life, unable to move, and waited while he placed me close by. He had no fear that I could hurt him now or that I could run. I blinked, whimpered, and watched while he was digging a grave for me in the forest. It was dark, the outline of the trees barely visible. I was faint. My hands clung and scraped into the dirt and leaf litter. There was nothing I could do. He kept digging down, making sure it was deep enough that I wouldn't be found. He must have been satisfied after a while. He lifted me up and I groaned. He was surprised I was still alive. My hand weakly gripped his arm, and this was the first time I truly saw his face. His eyes were sunken, half opened, and his lips a long, determined line. There were tears in his eyes. His eyes locked on mine, and for a second, his mouth opened and I thought he was going to apologize to me. Instead, he threw my body into the makeshift grave. Something inside me cracked, and it must have been a broken bone. I squirmed, trying to find a spot to ease the pain. But at this point, there was barely any. I stared up at him. Now he murmured a sorry under his breath and told me it wasn't personal. That he was a good person and just had to silence the voices in his head. That it would be over soon. He couldn't help it. Why couldn't I understand? I couldn't hear what else he said. What excuses or apologies he murmured that I was thankfully spared from hearing. He used a shovel to dig and throw dirt on my body. Layer by layer. Shovel load by shovel load, he piled on the dirt. I could feel the weight of the wet ground as it coated my body. And I knew it was only a matter of time before I was covered. The weight pressed and held me down. I could smell the earth and my blood mingling together. My toes and fingers felt numb. I heard my pounding heartbeat, and steadily it was growing weaker. The sound of his zipper and the stream of water from his body was a further indignity to be endured. I tried to think of anything. I wanted to be anywhere but here. He kept burying me, and soon all sound was muffled. The sound above ceased, and I guess he left. My death would come soon. I let out the smallest of sobs, one of the few sounds I could willingly make, and accepted that I would die. I could barely move my limbs. My time had come. I wanted to think of happy things, family and loved ones. None of them know what happened to me. Would my body ever be found? Would I end up being forgotten? I wanted to go home. There were no bright lights or signs from heaven. Hell was also silent. No whispers from any god made it through, and I was alone. Only when I was close to my final breath, I finally heard the whispers of the earth.
We're here with you.
Who are you?
We're the past, present, and the future. Life and death of the world. Seen and unseen. Those who have passed on and who are waiting to be born. We will keep you company until the end.
I don't want to be alone.
No, you won't be alone. We will be here.
I'm going to rot down here.
Yes.
I breathed my final breath, and everything fell silent around me. There was no bright lights or whispering from loved ones. There was darkness, nothingness, and the warmth of the earth. I couldn't see, and nor could I feel my physical body. My physical remains were not alone for long, and my body was soon joined by insects that buried into my body, feasted on my flesh, and nourished their young with me. I watched without eyes and no pain at the sight. The only emotion that clung to me, unwilling to let go, was the loneliness. Time didn't matter anymore. They're feasting on me. No one answered me. I lay there, idle, and watched while insects gnawed on my flesh. Many mouths making short work of my body, and soon it was unrecognizable. My body bloated with the change. I mourned my previous life, and watched the remains of mine disappear into the hungry mouths of 1,000 insects. The more my remains were consumed, the easier I could understand the whispered words of the earth. I'm scared.
Don't worry. You're not alone. You'll be part of us soon. We will keep you company.
I don't like this.
It will be okay. Go through time and the hunger of the underground.
My body was twisted and changed. Torn clothing clung to darkened bones, with the remains of rotting flesh and the remnants of my skin. My lips pulled back at a strange angle, baring my teeth. I wore a grim smile. Time didn't matter anymore. I was now part of the earth. Slowly, I realized how much peace I had in the grave. Sure, the sound of insects and worms making their way around occasionally disturbed me. I didn't have to worry about anything anymore. The more they consumed, and the way my fluids leaked into the soil, the more I felt part of the earth. I was part of it now. The voices were correct. I hated the way I looked now. I could speak to the earth without words, and the earth heard me.
Look above you.
Me? How? I didn't understand what was meant by this. I thought to myself, and slowly I began to move upwards. The disturbed earth now long settled. How long had it been? Not that I need to worry about it anymore. Time didn't matter. I barely remembered my life from before now. My thoughts and memories were of the earth, the plants, and the animals who became my world. I'd watch others live their lives, raise their families, and die, only to join me. As I rode through the layers of the earth, I was happy when I saw the sight before me. The ground on top of my grave was the outline of a humanoid shape. I could see how my arms were outstretched and bent at the elbows. The grass was greener, more lush, and many small flowers decorated the outline. The flowers warmed my heart. I was part of them, and truly felt at peace. I wasn't alone. There were others like me who suffered and found new life above them. One couldn't find rest or peace, and her soul wandered to find revenge. Our voices merged into one, and so, I was reborn. The area was so different now. I could vaguely remember being dragged and thrown inside my grave. No one had discovered it, and perhaps no one will. I could hear birds and smaller animals that had made their home nearby. My corpse, broken and twisted, had become something beautiful. I felt my consciousness drift downwards. I didn't fight it. I enjoyed the process and spread mentally into the earth. I became the earth. In death, I found new life. When the day never came. This story contains disturbing themes. Viewer discretion is advised. I don't know what happened. It began on a normal day. I was heading to work at a local bookstore. The sun was bright in the sky, and everything was like usual. I went to my local coffee store to grab my morning coffee before work. Not Starbucks. It's one of those family-run places. I like the close-knit atmosphere. I ordered my iced coffee, talked to Justin, the local barista, and I have to admit, I used to have a massive crush on him. I kept walking to work, clocked in, and put my drink behind the counter, before looking at the list of the things I needed to do. My job was relatively easy. Sort books, give customers reviews and recommendations, clean the store, take payments. It was good. There were more clouds in the sky and it was growing darker. It looked as though a storm was rolling through, which wasn't strange for this time of year. By the late afternoon, it was dark like nighttime. I worked my full hours and stepped outside. The car park was quiet. No sounds, nor signs of anyone. There were no people talking or walking. All the cars were parked by the side of the road. No birds, no pets, nothing. I had to fight the urge to go back into the bookstore and hide. I hurried to my car and drove home. It was the same on the streets around my home. Completely silent, with only the streetlights to light the way. No one else was on the streets. All the cars except one were parked. At one of the intersections, the traffic lights were flashing all the colors at once, and strangely there were 2 cars parked in the middle. There had been a collision, but there was no one there. No police or ambulances. Nothing. I slowly drove past to get a closer look. There was glass on the ground, but no signs of blood or a struggle. I drove home. Everything was the same, just eerily quiet. I didn't feel comfortable leaving my car in the driveway and parked in the garage. My house was dead silent. It looked like my boyfriend hadn't come home just yet. The house was dark. None of the lights were on except for the TV in the lounge room. I could hear the faint sound of a newscast. I put my bags and books down on the kitchen table, walked back into the lounge room, and saw there was a sharp change in weather that was causing odd behavior from people. Citizens were told to remain in their homes, not to go out, and to keep the use of communication devices to a minimum. There were 2 things that stood out. 1, to make as little noise as possible, and 2, not to let anyone besides the authorities inside their homes. These weren't the usual security broadcasts. Not going out made sense, but the rest? Why couldn't you reach out to your loved ones, or let them inside the house? It didn't make sense. I checked my phone for any missed calls or messages. Nothing. It wasn't like the people in my life not to message or try to call me. I tried sending a message to my boyfriend. It said, "Hey, do you know what's happening? Love you. Stay safe. Bye." I pressed send. I got a message saying the message couldn't be sent. Maybe the system was overloaded with people trying to reach their families. I wasn't sure. All except the noise from the TV. I couldn't hear anything else. It was all too silent. I figured that Jeff must have decided to stay at work, rather than ride this out, or try to make the trip home. I checked the house, just to be safe. Still, there was no sign of him. I made sure all the doors and windows were locked. It may have been overly cautious, but I didn't want to take the chance. I used a torch or a flashlight to light my way. I didn't want to risk lighting the house up, and went into the kitchen to take a large knife from the counter. I hate to say it. I was scared, but there was something about this that was exhilarating. I felt alive. My boring, mundane life had some excitement. I went up to my bedroom, put my torch on my bedside table, and locked the door. Before I curled up in bed, I took a peek outside into the streets, and again, it was quiet. I didn't want to sleep. My body was pumped and ready to defend myself from any would-be attackers, but I got changed, curled up in bed, and went to sleep. My dreams were erratic. I woke up in the dark and looked at my phone. 7 a.m. This wasn't normal. The sun should be up. I rubbed my eyes and went to the window. It was nighttime outside. The street was the same, or so I thought until I saw a shadowy figure move through the street. It had a humanoid shape. It stumbled around with long forearms, and had no other real distinct shape to speak of. It loped on all fours, hiding behind different cars and items left in the street. What the hell was this? I heard a low groan that ended in a gasp in the distance. I wasn't sure if it came from whatever this was. Suddenly, it turned its head and looked directly at me. I froze and felt the air sucked out of me. It made a sharp, twisting turn. If it was human, it would have broken their back and made a fast lope toward my house. "No," I whispered. I went and grabbed the knife, feeling safer with a weapon in my hand. Anything was better than nothing. I couldn't see where it was now. I figured it was downstairs, trying to find a way in, and I picked up my phone. Surely this was an emergency, enough to call the police, or someone who could help me. I had reception. I dialed 000, our version of 911. It rang, and I had to resist the urge to call out in glee. It rang, and kept ringing. Come on, please answer, I murmured to myself, trying to control my breathing and heartbeat. Both were loud and rapid. pounding in my ears. It kept ringing with no answer. And that moment I realized I'll be facing it alone. I held my knife ready. Okay, you've got this. You've got this. I encouraged myself, slowly crawled toward the stairs, and waited at the top of them. Downstairs, through the curtains, I saw the figure move from one window to the next, peering inside, and occasionally tapping against the window. The tapping became loud, demanding knocking. A bellowing roar emitted from its mouth, and it went to the door, trying to turn the locked handle. The knocking came again, loud, and the only sound other than my heartbeat. Yeah. Stay out, you fucking asshole. I gripped my teeth. It bellowed again, and started slamming its body against the wooden surface of the door. It didn't take long before it broke the lock and burst through. It stepped inside, looked from one room to the other on the spot. I slowly moved backward, tried to hide, and it made several quieter sounds now. I crawled backwards into the bedroom again, opened the closet and hid among the clothes in there. I heard it walk from room to room, no doubt hunting me, and tried to stay as silent as possible. I had a foolish hope that it would finally get bored, or find some other prey to go hunt instead. Through the crack, I saw it enter the room. It had no facial features or any clothing. It reminded me of a grey alien that had been stretched, but it was bulky. There was a distinct smell that made me gag. It was sickly sweet, so sweet it was disgusting. It stopped at the bed, lifted the blankets in hopes of finding a sleeping person. Finding none, it threw the blankets away angrily, as though it was mad it didn't end up finding me. It stopped at the window, looking outside, and pulled open the curtains to get a better look. While it was distracted, I knew I didn't have much time left. I readied the knife, opened the closet door, stabbed up into its neck, and it let out a bone-chilling scream of pain and anger. It roughly pushed me out of the way, causing me to drop the knife, and I screamed. It touched the wound as a squirt of black blood burst into the air. "Stay back! Don't come any closer!" I called out at it. It held its hand over at me, palm up, and seemed to wait. It grabbed a shirt from the floor, lifted it and tied it around its neck. Why was it taking so long to try to kill me? I wasn't going to wait for it to try again. I stood up, scurried to pick up the knife, and turned to run out the door, only for it to grab my arm and try to pull me back. I screamed, yanking my arm, and we struggled on the ground together. It kept trying to grab my wrists. I twisted at a sharp angle and plunged the knife into its sealed mouth. I thought it was going to scream. I stabbed it again and again. More bursts of black blood splashed me in the face and coated my clothing. It kept trying to grab my wrist to stop me. Driven by survival instinct, I kept going until there was no movement from it. It finally lay limp on the floor, surrounded by a thick pool of blood that clung to everything it touched. I sat on the floor and stared at my hands. From the wrist down, they were coated. I licked my lips and I tasted the blood. It didn't taste like blood. I stood up, ran to the bathroom and spat in the sink. I turned the faucet on to clear the sink. There was a stream of water coming from it, and I started to scrub my hands. None of it came off. I squirted liquid soap onto my wrists again and again and started to scrub again. I used a washcloth and kept scrubbing. My skin was becoming raw, but it wasn't off me yet. I used my loofah to try to get it off, but nothing was working. Come on. Get off. Get off me. I winced, unable to stop. I curled my fingertips around and started using my fingernails to tear at the skin. No matter what I did, it remained. I could feel the burn and the red of my blood as I scrubbed. I kept going, so focused on my task that I was dead to the world around me. Come on. Come on. I let out a cry of victory when its blood was pulled and revealed pink flesh. Finally, I stopped. It was far from perfect, but it was good enough. I wrapped them in bandages, trying to stop the blood, and I did. I walked to the window and looked outside again. Still nighttime, and still so quiet. Where were the people? I lifted my phone and called my boyfriend. This time it went through, but unfortunately, it went straight to voicemail. Still, I didn't want to miss my chance.
Hey, Jeff, I miss you and I'm getting really worried now. It's nighttime during the day and there is no one around. I don't know what to do. Something came into the house to try to hurt me. Don't worry, it's gone now. I love you. Please get in touch with me. Where are you? Bye.
I hung up, stared at my phone, and wished he would instantly call me back. My phone had no missed calls or messages. I didn't like this. I changed out of my blood-soaked clothing, whimpered when my arms brushed against something, and quietly snuck downstairs. The door was still off its hinges, and I didn't like how any of those things could walk through if they wanted to. The cool air entered my room, and a soft mist came through. It gave my home a haunted feeling. It would have been perfect for Halloween. I put the door up again, using a table to hold it up and hoped from a distance it would look like a closed door. But up close, it wouldn't matter. I grabbed the coffee table, flipping it over, and letting the items fall to the floor before putting it up against the door. It didn't look great, but I felt much better that I did it. I went into the kitchen for something to eat. Just a little bit of normalcy in the chaos. I opened the fridge and it was completely empty. I was going to do a grocery shop in a couple of days, but there was still supposed to be food in the fridge. What the hell? I opened up the freezer. It too was bare. There weren't even ice trays in there. This didn't make sense. I opened up all the cupboards, one after another, to see what was in there. There was nothing. Not even the canned goods that would live in there forever. Those too were gone. Shit. What am I going to do? I asked myself. I could drive into town again to see if there was anything in there. Or I could go to my neighbor's house to see if they had anything. I didn't like the idea of potentially stealing from my neighbors. I looked for my purse. I'd leave some money behind for them, and a note apologizing for taking what I needed. I hoped they would understand. Maybe I would run into them and we could help each other. I took a bag, my purse, and looked out the back door. The backyard was empty, all except for that strange mist swirling around. I unlocked the back door silently, closed it behind me while taking the key, and went to my next-door neighbor's house. I peeked through the windows. It was dark, but there was no movement that I could see. The house was deserted. Even their pets were nowhere to be found. I wasn't sure if that comforted or frightened me. I didn't know if it was a good idea to knock or not. I tapped my fingers against the door and waited. Nothing. I tried the doorknob, and to my surprise, it was open. I opened the door. In the silent home, it made an incredibly loud creak that made me wince. I walked into the home. Nothing looked different from the last time I was there. It looked as though my neighbors got up and left. There were even bowls of cereal on the dining table. I lifted it up and saw it was moldy. It smelled terrible and I put it back down. It had only been a day. How could the food get so bad so quickly? I instantly went to the fridge and opened it. I gagged at the foul smell. The vegetables and the meat had gone bad. I slammed the fridge shut in disgust. I tried the cupboards next. Everything was infested with some kind of insects. Or the cans were swollen, or had already popped. I groaned, closed the cupboards, and I didn't want to stay away from the house for too long. I looked out at the windows at the last house and saw what looked to be shadow figures walking across the front of the street. There were 2 taller ones and 2 shorter ones. They weren't a defined shadow. They would fade and return again. They seemed to be looking around. After my last encounter with something strange, I didn't want to deal with them either. Empty-handed, I went to the back door, climbed the fence back into my backyard, and rushed back into my house. I locked the door, wasting no time to make myself safe. Could I even kill a shadow person? I didn't want to be put in a position where I would have to find out. I rushed back up the stairs again. The corpse of whatever, it was still there, but now it looked to be drained of blood. I was getting hungry. I knew I shouldn't, but if I didn't, it would go bad and it would stink up my house. I also would need to eat at some point, but eating whatever the hell this was? I wrapped it in a sheet to try to preserve what was left of my home, dragged the body downstairs into the kitchen, and placed it on the kitchen table. It reminded me of an Egyptian mummy, all wrapped up. I got out the carvery kit. Normally my boyfriend would be the one doing the carving of roasts. Okay, I better get started. Should I separate the organs? I murmured to myself. I turned on the faucet and, to my relief, perfectly normal water came out. I unwrapped it and was finally able to see the damage I had inflicted. I didn't realize I had it in me to cause that much suffering to someone. The skin was like a thin layer of leather. It felt nice. If you got a leather lounge or pair of shoes with the same texture, you'd imagine it was good quality. I started skinning it. It was certainly sloppy and it wasn't the best. I was proud of myself with the final result. I hung it over the couch before going back to my task. I carefully sliced the stomach open. I vaguely remembered something about being careful, about not slicing the organs or something. When I reached the stomach cavity, cutting through muscle, I noticed it didn't look anything like what I remembered from health class. There looked to be only one organ, a large blood clot. I poked it, and it felt like jelly from my touch. I lifted it carefully and put it in the sink before I started the rest of my work. The head, hands, upper and lower arms, followed by the feet, lower legs, and upper legs. I was breathing heavy by the time I was done. It was a lot of work. I wrapped the pieces up in cling foil, placing each one except a hand into the fridge. I stared at it. My stomach growled from hunger. I slapped the kitchen bench and wondered to myself if this was something I really wanted to do. It wasn't like I was purposely going out of my way to eat this. I lifted the hand and took a little nibble on the finger. If I closed my eyes, I could forget it was humanoid, whatever the fuck it was. It didn't taste bad, just raw, like a mixture of beef and pork. The meat had barely any fat on it, and I found some oil, some spices, and if I was going to eat this, I was going to make it nice. I turned on the stove and got the fry pan ready. The sizzle and warmth were the only things that mattered. I stared at it, flipped it over, and waited for it to finish cooking. I plated it. Since there was absolutely nothing left in the house, just the hand. I nibbled on it before taking bites. There wasn't a lot of meat on it, but it was delicious. The feeling of having something warm in my stomach, when it was bone-chilling cold, made it worthwhile. I chewed down to the bones and disposed of the remains. I started hearing a low moaning throughout the house. I took the knife, held it ready, and my arms itched from the scratching. They started to ooze a yellowy pink liquid through the bandages. The groaning moved from one room to another. I tried to follow the sound, worried I'd find more shadow people, or something like what broke in. It went from one room to another, leading me from the left side of the house to the right. It felt like it was spinning around me, never letting me get too close, and I felt dizzy. I leaned back against the wall to try to steady myself when I heard whispering coming from the walls. It was one thing to have danger outside, but inside the bones of your home? No. Shut up, I murmured. The whispering was joined by scratching inside the walls. I smacked the walls to try to stop it. It stopped, but my wrists felt like they were burning. I tried to scratch inside them with my stained hands, fingernails trying to get under the skin. I need to clean them. I went upstairs and opened the bathroom door. All the faucets had been left on. The water had spilled over the edge and flowed onto the floor. My shoes made wet sounds as I took steps. I turned the sink faucets off, unplugged the sink, and heard the sound of the water slowly pour down the drain. I couldn't look at my reflection in the mirror, keeping my gaze down at the floor, and reached down into the water in the bathtub to get the plug. The water was thick, like jello. It clung to my arms, and strangely hard to get through. I lifted the plug through the sludge. The water stank like it had been sitting there. Green mold rested on the surface. It made loud, gluggy sounds as it finally drained and left twisted, hard lumps inside. I nearly threw up with the vile smell. I rested on the edge of the bathtub, and I could have sworn I saw the outline of a humanoid shape. I jumped up, nearly falling over, and using the sink to hold myself up. "What is going on?" I murmured. I got up and left, placing a couple of towels at the door to try to keep any remaining water inside. I heard the groaning this time coming from downstairs. Whatever it was, I wasn't going to let it get a chance to corner me. I stumbled down the stairs. They felt uneven and warped. Was there some kind of natural disaster that I didn't realize? I then heard the moaning coming from inside the fridge. The only thing that was in there was the chopped up pieces of whatever it was that was in there. There was a rattling sound from inside the fridge. I went to pick up my knife when I realized I must have left it upstairs in the bathroom. I opened the cupboards to try to find another. All the steak knives were gone. Even the ones from the carving kit were nowhere to be found. What the hell was happening? I needed a weapon. I couldn't do it alone. I could feel something moving inside my wrists, twisting and turning. I scratched them again. I could feel the blood and flesh under my nails. My hands were still stained. I pulled the bandages off and yelled. They stuck to my skin, or rather, they had become my skin. I looked at it. The fabric smelled terrible, and the moaning from the fridge grew louder. The sharp hitting sounds against the fridge door grew more rapid. I opened the fridge door wide open. The remains were moving. Only this time, they looked human. Sure, a skinned human. Eyelidless eyes. Scared, with bright blue eyes darted around. Terrified before they locked on mine. They looked so familiar. It tried to speak with a torn, twisted mouth, and only garbled sounds came out. I lifted the head out and placed it on the kitchen table. I couldn't do anything else about the other body parts. Hey, it's okay, I comforted, not entirely sure why. I needed to make things right. I had to fix things. There were shadows moving at the windows. I stopped in my tracks and peeked outside. The shadow people were walking around my house again, peering through the windows, occasionally calling out and tapping or knocking on the windows. The eyes of the head went wild, frantically looking around, and I cradled it against my chest as I knelt on the wet floor. Are you there? What was that sound? It didn't make any sense. I took the head and ran upstairs to find somewhere safe. I heard them clambering and trying to move the various items that blockaded the open, damaged door. There were too many of them to fight, and I wouldn't be able to hold them off on my own. I ran up to the bedroom, where I killed the head, I guess. I saw the semi-dried blood pool on the floor, and it started a loud scream. I held the mouth, or what had been a mouth, shut with my fingers. I went to hide in the closet. The pain and wriggling in my wrist became unbearable. Where are you? There was that weird sound again. There were black worms or leeches poking through the wounds, and bandages on my forearms. I scratched and pulled them out, again and again, ripping and pulling them out, scratching them, tearing at them, desperately trying to get them out. The sound of rushed footsteps through the house, radio static with voices trying to come through with a variety of pitches and sounds. The static became unbearable. I covered my ears, trying to block out the sounds and the noise. My ears felt like they were going to burst. They were coming for me. I kept scratching my forearms. I couldn't stop now, and I heard them at the top of the stairs. Armored aliens moved through the house. They were armored in blue, held something in their hands, and I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of killing me or taking me alive. I kicked open the closet door. They put their hands out to me and tried to get a hold of me. I leapt for the window. I could feel the prick of glass against my skin, falling through it, and I landed on a piece of concrete. My skull cracked at the back, but that wasn't the last thing I saw or heard. It wasn't nighttime anymore. The mist had dispersed. The sky was finally blue, with a few soft clouds, and I could feel the warmth of the sun on my face. There was a concerned human face looked down at me. Soon they were joined by many, and I could finally hear the murmur of their words. I never noticed how beautiful the sky looked. I lifted my torn and mutilated arm toward the sun. At least at the end, things were good again before I breathed my last breath. When I became death, I didn't expect it to happen. I wasn't killed through something dramatic or horrendous. You could say my passing was quite anticlimactic. I had been sick on and off for a while, and I didn't take care of my health for some time. I knew I should care more, but I didn't. One day, just like any other, everything suddenly hurt. It was unbearable. I got up and went to grab my phone from the lounge room to call an ambulance. I picked it up, my hand shaking, and tried to call out for someone to hear me. I stumbled with it, dialing the emergency number, and dropped my phone before I could press start call. The worst possible timing. I felt so nauseous that I hunched over in pain, gripping my stomach and my chest. It was tight. I couldn't breathe anymore. I had been warned about it but didn't take it seriously. I gasped my final breath and fell loudly to the floor. Pain was my last memory. I wasn't in my body anymore. I sat looking at my body laying in an unnatural position on the floor. I looked strained, exhausted, and the pain-filled look in my eyes haunted me. I didn't move for a while, and just stared at my lifeless body. There was no light to head toward, and nor did I see any reaper to take me to the afterlife. No heaven nor hell. I waited for days. Nobody living or dead came to find me or take me away. Was I forgotten? Did this mean I was going to become a ghost? What was going to happen to me? I watched the sunlight enter the room, then the night, and hoped I would be found soon. The thought of having insects crawl inside my body and devour me terrified me, as the idea of rotting in my house. My corpse started to leak fluids, and I knew I stank. Not that I had the sensation of smell anymore. I didn't want to look. I kept finding myself drawn to my dead body. A part of me hoped I would suddenly crawl back to life, and this was all a painful dream. I walked around my house trying to find something to do. My existence became aimless. Nothing had the same enjoyment that it did in life. All the books I would read, my phone that I would spend hours of my day on, all of it no longer mattered to me. I had no more cravings for rest. I no longer needed sleep. And while this was something I would have loved when I was alive, I wanted to rest and finally be at peace. Food had no taste, no joy, nothing that excited me anymore, depending on how long it would take for me to be found. The food in the house would also rot. The fruit pie would eventually go bad, and attract fruit flies that always found a way in. I longed to feel part of the world again, both the good and the bad. The world looked strange through the dead's eyes. I walked to the window and stared outside. It was still sunny. A classical, beautiful day, and life continued to move forward despite my passing. It was oddly reassuring that life would go on if mine came to a sharp, sudden stop. I waited for days before a nosy neighbor came to speak to me. She usually needed help with some pointless task or another, or to try to pry into my business. I've never been so happy to see her. She tried knocking on the door, where I usually greeted her and would lose time out of my day. Then she walked from one window to another, using her hand to peek through and get a better view inside. She jumped and let out a cry of shock. She must have seen me, and I felt a burst of relief. I thought she was going to go get someone or report my death. Instead, she hurried back to her house, closed the door, and didn't leave. I called out to her from the window, asking her to come back and to tell somebody. At nighttime, she finally made her return, and there was no one with her. She held a bag and some tools. She occasionally paused and looked over her shoulder, careful that none of our other neighbors would see her. Why did she need the bag? I watched, unable to stop her, and she opened the side gate, then walked to the backyard, and I kicked myself for never locking the back door. She slid it open and closed it behind her, locking it. My heart sank when I realized what her goal was. She went over to look at my now rotting body, covered her nose, and knew there was no chance I was alive. She placed a handkerchief over her face, trying to keep the smell out, and I saw a smug look of satisfaction on her face. She looked at my phone. I think she was going to steal it, but thought better of it. The runoff from my body was leaking an outline around me. She went upstairs and walked around the different rooms until she found my bedroom. I never let her inside my house because she always tries to pry into my life. I kept following her around my home. I was screaming at her, telling her to get out of my house and stop touching all of my things. My words fell on silent ears. She made a dismissive joke about my tastes and started to open the doors, looking for valuables she could steal. She rummaged around and didn't bother to put things back. Soon, books or pieces of clothing were left lying around behind her. I hated people being in my room at the best of times, but having someone do this, I despised her. I tried standing in front of her. I wanted to push her away, and for the briefest moment, she stopped dead in her tracks, shivered, and looked around with fear in her eyes. She called out asking if someone was there with her. It wasn't enough to stop her. Brave and selfish once more, she opened another drawer and lifted up some coins. Why would you even bother with some change? She kept going with her hunt for my valuable pieces of property. When her eyes lit up with greed at the sight of my jewelry box, I screeched loudly at her to stay away from it. She made no sign she was able to hear me, or if she did, she didn't care. She saw my grandmother's bracelet, a priceless heirloom that had been passed down from my mother and then to me. She lifted it up, placed it around her wrist and admired it. Eager for more loot, she opened the box up fully, the mirror reflecting her expression, and she saw me for the first time. I was a ghastly figure, my eyes in pieces where insect life had begun to feast, and before I could get a better look, she dropped the jewelry box on the ground, spilling the contents over the floor and breaking the glass. She screamed loudly, terrified, and her fear gave me the power I needed. I felt like I had feasted for the first time in years. Power rushed through my body. The furniture in the room shook violently. Some of the items managed to fall on the ground, and she tried to run away. The door slammed. Unfortunately, it didn't lock her inside with me, and she managed to escape. I was able to go through the closed door, and I followed her down the hallway. I didn't do it. My neighbor tripped and fell down the stairs. Her head bumped hard on the floor. It cracked and I saw blood leaking from her head. She wasn't dead. Not yet. I stood over her. I could see her breathing, and it was slowly becoming weaker with every breath. I lowered myself down on her. She was so close to death. I knew she could see me now. I could see my reflection in her terrified eyes, and I wasn't frightened or disturbed by it. I embraced death. My skin was green, pasty, and had the fluids drained. My hair was clumped in dried blood and liquid from my corpse. My eyes still had insects inside them. They wriggled and one dropped down on her face. She whimpered, unable to escape, and I leaned in close so our noses were barely touching.
"I'm looking forward to you staying with me forever,"
I whispered, my voice now strange to my ears. It was distorted, raspy, and I enjoyed it. I heard her breathe her final breath and hoped she too would appear. I didn't wish to be alone in my solitude anymore, even if I was bound to someone I despised. I wanted for more souls to join me and give me that rush I felt when she saw me for the first time. Her spirit form sat up and crawled backward away from me, screaming. She was crying, covering her face, and repeatedly asking what was happening to her. Did she die? She muffled apologies for stealing from me, and it was getting harder to understand her. The reality didn't sink in. Each time she spoke, it only grew more erratic. Now there are 2 corpses in my house. I tried to ignore her crying, even when the boredom sank in. Days passed, and still, our bodies were not retrieved. I regretted living a quiet life now, barely even speaking to my sister and other members of my family. My phone would occasionally light up and ring, until the battery finally drained completely. Outside, old newspapers were beginning to pile up, and the garden was unkempt with an overgrown lawn, weeds growing in the garden beds, and cobwebs in the windows. My car hadn't moved, and there had been no signs of change, all signs of a lack of occupation. I watched as my neighbor's family tried to check on her. No doubt she didn't call or text them regularly anymore, like she normally did. The monotony of my life was replaced with a form of entertainment I thought I would never do. I spent my days tormenting my neighbor. A couple of days of being dead gave me an edge on her, or perhaps it was because it was my house. I'm not sure. I would appear out of nowhere to frighten her, lock her in cupboards so she would bang against the doors, wailing to get out and go back home, push her down the stairs or force her to look at her corpse. She was so sorry for trying to steal from me. The items didn't mean that much to me anymore. I cared more about the house itself. I was bound here, and every time I tried to leave, I was pushed straight back inside, unable to move forward or back. I needed to protect my territory. I don't think she quite understood that she was dead. Even when she saw her body, she never recognized it as her own. A concerned and more moral neighbor must have contacted the authorities about the house. Maybe she heard something. I don't know. I saw the police knocking on the front door, calling my name, and asking if they can come in to do a welfare check. They were peeking inside the windows, eventually seeing us, and tried to come in the locked back door. They broke in and called out to the empty home. And soon, they broke in and called out in the empty home. And soon, they stood over the 2 dead bodies. I leaned on the wall, listening to the different police officers walk through, and see if there had been any sign of foul play. Since death was a frequent part of their day, it felt as though it was another day in the office. They chatted about what their kids were doing, what they were going to eat for lunch after this, and even some minor celebrity gossip. It was when they went upstairs and saw that items had been taken out that raised concerns for them. 2 of the officers went outside to call the coroner in order to take the bodies out of the house and begin their investigation. One of them went upstairs. Soon he too was looking around, and I could have sworn he managed to pocket some items too. Did anyone have any respect for the dead? I watched him and stood close. He shivered, goosebumps on his arms, and he must have sensed something. He stopped dead in his tracks, looked around the quiet room and couldn't feel me anymore. He brushed it off and went into the ensuite to do his business, which I wouldn't have minded. If you gotta go, you gotta go. However, he made no effort to remain tidy and peed over everything, the toilet seat and all over the floors. I wanted to try something different this time. I stood behind him and whispered threats into his ear. His body knew he was under threat before his mind was able to process it. I ran my ghostly fingers down his arms, that itched to be away from my touch, and I was about to strike him down when I heard a person call him from the door. A middle-aged man with graying sides, a bald patch, and a pot belly, looked 100% done with his occupation. He suspiciously looked at the rogue officer and at the room, then asked if he had taken or moved anything. The frightened cop shook his head. He was studied for a moment, and then told to go downstairs. The thief left the room. The newcomer lingered at the open door and around the room before murmuring sorry under his breath. I wasn't sure if he had a good nature, or if there was a chance he sensed me watching him. I kept following the officer that disrespected my home, ever his shadow, and waited for the chance he may slip up. The kind officer never left him alone. Perhaps he suspected my motives. He was the first and the last one to truly escape me. I always thought I would be bound to my remains. At least that's what all the legends said regarding the dead. However, I still lingered here, even when the coroner took both our bodies away for examination. The crime scene cleaners came to remove the blood and fluid with maggots squirming around inside it. They even had to remove the carpet because it couldn't be cleaned. My neighbor still wandered around. With her body gone, the last piece of sanity left her, and she would walk around the house sobbing when I wasn't tormenting her. I would see strangers stop and look at the house outside, listening to her antics, and hope that they would come inside. Wisely, they did not. After a couple of months, some of the local teenagers decided to pay us a visit. They came in and gawked at the faint outline where my neighbor's corpse had been, and then over to mine. The crime scene cleaners didn't manage to get it all. They made themselves at home on my furniture, got out their alcohol and other substances, If I was alive, I may have joined in with them. They hung out, got up to leave, and hadn't damaged anything when they heard my neighbor's loud wailing. Naturally, it scared them, and they ran out as quickly as they could. Because of her, the home gained the reputation for being haunted. It was a double-edged sword. On one hand, people would look at the house and rush to get away from it. And on the other, it acted as a beacon for people to come see what the fuss was all about. I heard them outside before I saw them. They were doing their YouTube introductions and talked about some of the stories concerning the house. Most made sense and were true. However, a few people added their own fictional ones in. That there had been a murder. Oh no, not yet. They looked around the house and set up their electronic equipment in the lounge room. They kept asking if anyone wanted to communicate with them, if anyone was here with them, and that I shouldn't be afraid. I had to make sure I didn't walk past anything to set it off. I didn't want them to have proof that ghosts actually existed. Each time I saw the camera in my direction, I would run and hide, only watching them from around a corner, and waited for them to leave. When the cameras were off, they talked about the uneasy feeling, but they didn't hear any of the wailing or see anything. I had been growing weaker lately. I knew I needed to attack and create another in order to feed myself. I regretted not doing anything when they left and more time passed. I was growing weaker. I looked down at my hands and they were becoming transparent. Was this the end? I didn't want to die or disappear, wherever I would end up going. A young couple broke in one night. They spoke about watching a video on it and seeing a face in the corner of the room. My face. I tried to be careful, and they still managed to see me. There was a young man with a cropped beard and half covered his face with a mask. She was a curvy redhead, her hair tied back, and both of them were dressed in black. It was harder for me to recognize people, yet there was something familiar about them. These two were better prepared than the others. They called out a familiar name. I think it was what I used to be called, and asked if I wanted to speak with them. I shook my head, not that they could see me, and it was when I noticed the redhead was looking directly at me. She reached out with her hand and told me I didn't need to be scared. It had the opposite effect. She told me she knew what happened, and I had every right to be angry, but it was time for me to move on from this place and find peace. I walked toward her, stood barely a meter away from her, and I could feel myself slowly turning into nothing. She kept telling me not to be frightened and go toward the light. I felt myself floating, rising upward, like inhaling and preparing yourself for release. I heard the wail down the hallway, and they jumped. The moment of concentration broken. The memories of how and what happened in the past were difficult to remember now. All I knew was I hated her. I wanted her to suffer. The hope lost, I returned to what I was. I let out a devilish screech, and my hands went around the redhead's neck, squeezing, and she screamed. I felt strong. I fed and felt alive once more. Her boyfriend threw something at me that burned my skin and nearly pushed me away. I kept going. I felt something move through my fingers, burning and twisting at them. It was only now that I realized. I managed to somehow push my fingers into her skull. Her boyfriend screamed at me, and it didn't take her long to die. With her passing, I gained more strength, and instantly went for him too. Arms outstretched, teeth bared, and I floated through the air at him. I didn't even need to touch him. The sight of me was enough to cause him to fall back behind. His corpse locked in a screaming defensive position, with his hands up in the air in an attempt to protect himself. His ghost always remained scared of me, and rarely showed himself to anyone, living or dead. His girlfriend often tries to reach out to him, or anyone else who enters the house, trying to warn them to stay away, or that it's best for them to leave. She is the most aware out of all of us. She remembers her life before, and what was lost, yet even finding a feeling of peace in death. She surprisingly held no grudge over what happened. My hands changed, They were skeletal and coated in a thick, tar-like substance. I'm guessing years had passed. All the houses in the neighborhoods had new families in them. They changed, as did the gardens outside, and my house remained the same, falling into disrepair. The tires of my car had burst or had been stolen. This time, the corpses of the couple had not yet been found. We would all become more active at night, looking through windows or making sounds. The house gained a reputation for not only being haunted, but a dangerous place to be. And it was. The redhead would pinch or encourage people to leave the house, warning them of my presence. Even in death, I still retained the ability to hurt her. And one time, the distraction was enough for me to trap one of the rogue children in the kitchen. He tried to hide under the sink, wedged in between the moldy potatoes and the old cleaning products. He wept, arms wrapped around his body, and his friends ran from the house, leaving him to his fate, and nor did they tell anyone about it either. I drained him of life, leaving a tiny husk of what he once was, and soon he would haunt the cupboards, never leaving the place he felt safe. I didn't need to feed as often. The next one was a homeless man who came in to seek refuge from the weather. I was content with him being there for a while, until he started lifting books to burn on a makeshift fire to heat the house. Furious, he damaged property that didn't belong to him. I began my hunt. He heard the redhead's warning, finally, and made a run toward the back door. I heard him muttering something under his breath, pleading, and he died close to it. I was sure it was still locked. I looked at it. This was important to me for some reason, and it made me remember pieces of my old life. My human life rather than this existence. Most of the ghosts spent their undead lives in isolation, trying to avoid each other. Even the redhead no longer tried to speak to her boyfriend, and instead tried to let him be in his misery. As the years went on, her sanity hindered her, and her memories faded. She knew something was wrong, and she loved someone, but couldn't remember who it was. People would come to the house and get photos outside to prove they had been there. The outside was littered with graffiti now, and occasionally, kids from the outside would throw rocks at the house, breaking windows. They would even run up and touch the doors or the windows. There was even a game where people would run around to tap all the windows downstairs, and then throw a pebble at each of the upstairs windows. If you managed to do each of them, it was said to be a sign of good luck. The front and backyards became more dilapidated. All humans now looked the same to me. All of them were intruders who needed to leave. All except two. Over the years, there were two visitors that came to the house that I remembered. My sister sat outside in her car. She was older, elderly, and had been crying for some time. Her eyes were sunken in, and purple from her grief. Her hair was grey now, and she needed to walk with a cane to help her. She sat on the doorstep, missing the remains, and looked around at the state of the house from the outside. She apologized for not coming sooner to clean and pack things away. She couldn't deal with facing the fact I wasn't with her anymore. Why didn't we bother to keep in touch more? And why didn't we make an effort to keep each other in our lives? Any issue we had could have been so easily resolved. She told me of her fears for the future, the rumors she heard about this house, and she wondered whether she could have done something to prevent it. I couldn't even remember her name. She told me this will probably be the last time she can come to the house. I wanted to kill her, but not out of anger, so we could be together forever. Somehow we would remember each other's names, but instead, I let her walk off the property. I wished she would come back, and had the feeling she would soon die, and travel wherever the dead are supposed to go. She took one final look at the house, whispered something I couldn't understand, and drove away. I was left wandering around the house, ignoring the other ghosts and their own personal hells. I wished I wasn't simply confined to the boundaries of the house. The second visitor was the same officer who apologized, not long after I passed away. He came with a priest in tow, and instantly I felt a feeling of dread. The priest checked the house, and I forced the other ghost to be quiet around him. I didn't want his attention on us. He didn't say a word as he moved from room to room, taking a moment to investigate. And he didn't react when he saw the skeletons on the floor. A man who was used to walking with death and demons. His heavily lined face frowned and otherwise showed no emotion, no fear. No doubt he had seen death many times previously, or had delved into some dangerous locations. He whispered something to the now elderly police officer and left. The officer didn't linger and looked inside before he too left. They came back with other people, and I found that I couldn't attack them. Instead, I hid in the highest crawl spaces, and I could still hear what they were saying. They said I was a malicious spirit. What was wrong with defending my home? Wouldn't they do the same if they were in the same position? Each of the ghosts was dealt with. One by one, they moved on through force, or happy willingness to leave their personal hell. I didn't like any of them, but loathed the idea of being alone. I stayed hidden. I could sense them moving through the house, going room to room, checking and cleansing just in case I still lingered there. I struggled to remain in those places and had to flee. They came up into the crawl space, where I hid in a hidden section that the smoke could not reach and managed to remain. The priest said he believed the house was clear, but there was something that lingered. He wasn't wrong. The police were called for the bodies. The house had become even more infamous. The police officer and the priest were both taken in for questioning about the event. I watched, quietly, while they removed the bodies and felt so lonely. I couldn't be left alone. None of them were willing to be left alone. I needed to grab one of them. Soon they finished their work and left the crime scene. The old tape fell apart as time went on. There were no crime scene cleaners who came to tend to the remains this time. The house was simply abandoned, left to decay and time. I'm not sure how long I was alone for. A group of teenagers came inside and gasped at the old corpse stains, taking videos and photos of it, proof they had visited my home. They lit candles surrounding them, the only light in the dark room, and pulled out an Ouija board. They set up cameras to record their encounters, and at this point, I didn't care. I needed their energy. I couldn't walk anymore. I would grip and slide from one wall to another. In the mirror, I saw my appearance for the first time. I no longer resembled the human I used to be. I was a black, shape-shifting mist, in a vaguely humanoid shape, with two glowing amber eyes staring out. I stood looking at myself, and there were calls of, "Is anyone here?" or "Does anyone want to communicate with us?" I floated above them, looking down at the 4 teenagers and their equipment. The candlelight flickered when I moved past, and I rested a finger on their planchette. I moved it to yes. They gasped and whispered among themselves. Humans were so strange. I no longer felt any connection to the living. Their lives meant nothing to me. "Who are you?" they asked, in between checking the cameras to make sure they were recording. I moved it to the following letters: F-R-I-E-N-D, friend. Next they asked if I was one of the good spirits from the house. I moved it to yes. They seemed to relax now and started to ask pointless questions. Sometimes I would humor them by answering. None of them realized the danger they were in, and I wondered why none of them questioned why no one else was in the house. They let down their guard. Finally, one of them, perhaps the boldest and the most foolish, asked, "Do you want to come home with us?" I loved my home, the place I would always defend. However, this offer was so incredibly tempting. I moved the planchette to yes. They looked at each other and started to talk amongst themselves, that it wasn't right to leave a good spirit here, that they should be more careful, and they hadn't seen any sign of the evil creature that lived here. Me. I knew they were talking about me. The one logical friend said not to invite me in, or to come with them. I spelled out N-E-E-D, need, T-O, 2, T-R-A-V-E, travel. INSIDE, inside. APERSON, person. Again, they looked at each other, and this time two of them said it was a terrible idea, that a spirit shouldn't be able to go inside your body. They bickered between themselves for a good while. Floating above, I watched them and got a better look at them. Their fashion was vastly different. I couldn't understand some of the words they used, and their mannerisms. Finally, it was 3 against 1. She told them she had a good feeling about this, and we had a connection. I want to. You may enter my body and travel with me. I gave you permission to do so. It was now one of them looked up and saw me. I dropped down, entered through her mouth and nose. The candles flickered out. The room was pitch black. Instantly I took over her body, and it felt strange to be inside someone for the first time. I felt my hands around my fingers over my skin, feeling it for the first time. The body I was in was young and healthy. I can live the life I should have lived and grinned. I had the memories of my host. She screamed at me to give control of her body back, and I told her it was mine. I was asked if I was okay, and I told them that I was fine. A flashlight lit up in the room in pieces, and I laughed. I told them I had faked the whole thing, and it was all an elaborate prank. They smacked my arm and told me I had really freaked them out, all except one girl who looked at me suspiciously. She didn't say anything at the time. We went to leave, and I struggled at the door to leave. The outside looked so different. All the houses I knew were gone, and the buildings were in stark, blocky shapes. The neighborhood wasn't one I recognized. The cars were expensive, with far more gadgets than I remembered, and clearly it had been gentrified over a long period of time. It had been nearly 100 years, perhaps more. So much time had passed. I took a step out the front door. I was free. I could go anywhere and do anything I wanted. The feeling of being thrown back was no longer there. We walked toward the car, and once I was on the footpath, it was difficult to contain my feelings. A whole new hunting ground had opened up for me. When I was dropped off at my host's house, I made idle chit-chat with my new parents, and the mum looked at me strangely for a moment and told me I should be in bed. I made my way up to my bedroom as soon as possible. I nearly fell up the stairs with my enthusiasm. I showered. All the sensations felt incredible, and I slept in bed. And while I no longer had the cravings of the living, it was pleasant to live it out. I got changed for bed and curled up in the warm blankets. I couldn't sleep though. Something was missing, and no matter how much I tried to rest, I couldn't. I had to do it. Around my fingers, I could see the black mist that typically surrounded my ghostly form. I had to kill. I went down to the kitchen, pulled out a butcher's knife, and walked back up the stairs. Her parents were sleeping in bed. I could hear them snoring, and inside my head, she was screaming and pleading with me not to kill them. I approached the bed and watched them sleeping so peacefully. I stabbed the mum first, and this time, killing felt so different, having to push the blade through blood and tissue. I could feel the hot blood on my face, torso and arms, causing my nightgown to cling to me. I took one life, and I could feel her spirit around me, confused, scared, and broken, like they always were. She pleaded with me not to kill her husband. I moved to my host's father. He must have taken something to help him sleep, because he didn't wake up, and I drove the knife into his chest. He woke with a grunt, grabbed me and shoved me roughly aside, the betrayal in his eyes as he thought it was his daughter doing this to him. The violence only encouraged me. I slashed and stabbed him repeatedly until his spirit too appeared. Husband and wife consoled each other, and I told them that yes, they were dead. It was only now they recognized I wasn't their beloved daughter. They screeched at me, demanding to know who I was and why I possessed her. They knew the answer, even as they kept pressuring me to speak. Finally, they asked who I was, and I answered with a single word: death. The Dread Lady. I saw her when my father's car crashed. The family car hit another vehicle, and our car rolled down into a drainage ditch, upside down. I remember seeing my parents' lifeless bodies laying bloodied and bruised from the impact. My father's skull was crushed in. Pieces lay on the windscreen, and my mother's throat had been slit, nearly fully decapitating her. Her neck clung on with barely a slither of skin. Droplets of blood dribbled down onto the floor, staining it with a vivid red color. My seatbelt held me snugly in place, unable to move, and I waited for help or death to take me first. I dropped my phone. It lay beneath me, just out of reach, and no matter how much I reached for it, I couldn't get to it. I remember running my hand over my stomach and feeling the warm blood. Something pierced me and I didn't know what I should do. I called out trying to get my phone to unlock, but it needed a thumbprint. Helpless, I watched as I was unable to do anything. I heard a whisper, "You are not alone." Serene and beautiful, the voice of an angel. I saw the outline of her body, feminine curves shrouded by semi-transparent black mist. I couldn't tell if it was a multi-layered gown or not. It was difficult to see if she was walking or floating above the ground. Either way, it was slow and graceful. I only saw her eyes, a pale celestial gray, and they regarded me kindly. She stood by the wreckage, just out of arm's reach, and I wondered why she didn't help me. The pool of blood was darker, and the bodies of my parents were also gone. The shadows of their remains would flicker in and out before they finally faded away, with no ashes left behind. Why didn't she reach for my phone to call an ambulance? I looked down at it and saw it was blank. No battery left. Deep down, I knew she wasn't of this world. "Are you an angel?" She smiled under her veil. "Some call me that, while others call me a devil, a demon. What I can offer you is a chance for peace." Her voice was soft and smooth, a gentle melody. "My parents are gone," I sulked, unsure of the offer placed in front of me. Pain gripped my body, unable to escape it, and I looked at the broken bodies of my parents, wishing they were alive and well. "Wait, why did they appear again?" "They have already left. They're at peace, and they're waiting for you to join them." Despite how obvious it was, I didn't want to believe that they were dead yet. The harsh reality struck me and I started to weep. She watched me, interested, and tilted her head to one side. The veil on the lower part of her face moved, revealed skeletal teeth and the hollow jaw of the dead. I froze, too scared to move, and she withdrew her hand. "Am I dead?" "Yes. You begin a new adventure now," she began. "No, I want to stay here." She winced. Her beautiful eyes changed to empty, shallow pits of darkness, and she let out a soft growl. I wasn't sure what I said to offend her. "This is not your world, little one. The more you stay here, the more likely you are to twist into something you no longer recognize," she explained, perhaps with the most patience she was capable of expressing. Around us the real world was no more. In the distance, I saw shadow figures walking through, as though they were living their lives, and I wondered what they were. I heard haunting sounds of car engines, with sharp, sudden braking sounds, and the crunch of metal and bone, the ripping of flesh. I saw 2 headlights of a giant truck aimed at me, the lights blinding, and I heard the loud boom of the truck's horn. I turned my head to shield my eyes. When I saw the truck disappear, I heard crying up and down the road of different people. The asphalt road changed to what it had been hundreds of years ago. Before my eyes I saw horses and carriages of different types, cars from the turn of the century, and other forms of transportation. There were people, some walking with their intestines dangling on the ground behind them, unaware of their injuries, while others were painfully aware. Each walked in their own misery. Her hand was offered, long-fingered with manicured nails. I reached out with my own trembling hand. It was smaller, and once it connected with hers, fingertips curled around to hold mine. I was no longer in my body. I felt light, floating, and I stood alongside her. She turned to lead me. "Do not let go of my hand, little one. I will guide you." She didn't look down at me. Instead, looking into the distance at something I couldn't see, a goal I couldn't understand, and a direction I wasn't aware of. Hands from unseen sources reached out to me, grabbing and pulling at my hair or my clothes. Some were human and others rotted, trying to pull me down to the ground. I gripped her hand tightly, quickened my pace to a brisk walk, and still struggled to keep up with her. I could hear their wailing, their pleads, their anger, and their sadness over dying, being forced to linger for all eternity in limbo, unable to move forward or back. They were all ages, the elderly, barely able to move, and they clung on to me, hungry for their youth, bones protruding from their body, teeth long fallen out, and patches of grey hair falling to the ground. The stench of the dead filled the air, and I tried to keep the aroma away. Others who dragged IV drips and had bandages cover their bodies. Clearly people who had died at hospital, or perhaps inside of ambulances. Some no longer had hands to grab, only reaching out at me with severed arms with missing hands, black blood squirting up into the air. There were children, babies, crawling and screaming, pulling at my clothing, trying to drag me down with them. There were some under the mist that sounded the most terrifying of all. A long, aching moan as pieces of bone tried to slice into my ankles, to drag me under. They were weighing me down and I didn't want to join them. Wherever the lady would take me, surely had to be better than staying here with any of them. "Please, don't let me go," I pleaded with her. She didn't look at me, or acknowledge me at all, and still maintained her pace, oblivious and unaffected by the dead's cries for mercy. I could see the road in front of me, clearly defined, twisted shiny rock distorted into bricks, leading us down a path with no end, and I looked up at her, trying to get her to acknowledge me. It was difficult to walk with her while they pulled me down. The sounds they made were horrific, and it was hard to shut them out. "Who are you?" The skull did not falter. A flicker of her mortal form gave me a sideward glance, interested in what I said. She lifted her free hand, gently curled her fingertips, and the dead around me faded to ash. Their demands disappeared along with them. The world around us was black and white. Barren trees without adornment of leaves stood on a desolate earth. A grey mist surrounded us, concealing whatever creatures had glowing eyes from the tree line, and I couldn't tell what they were. I was relieved to be away from the wandering hordes of the lingering dead, but that didn't make this place any more peaceful. "Who are you?" I insisted. "The Watcher, the mistress between worlds, the guide in the dark, the dread lady, the living and the dead. All names I've been called through history, and with many tongues," she responded, each title drawn out, and her words were slow. Still with my hand in hers, and we kept walking along that endless road. I didn't recognize any of the names she told me. I figured she was some forgotten goddess, whose original name had been lost to time, and now she kept going on with her eternal task. She never said the name she called herself. "Where are you taking me?" It felt like an eternity that we were walking. I looked back to the car where my body and those of my parents remained. The car was long gone, not even a shadow to alert me where it had been, and I had to wonder whether it had even been there at all. My memories of my life were slowly fading away, the little hobbies and trivial items that meant so much to me. Time means nothing when you're dead. Along the road of the dead, some refuse and become trapped where they are. others seeing something or someone along the road and refuse to walk with me. I leave them to the fate they choose. I cannot and will not force someone to walk with me. We didn't make any footsteps, and I wasn't sure if I could anymore. Did that mean I was floating? How many stay behind? I saw glowing eyes from the shadows, and their bodies were hidden by the mist. They never came close, and I fear what would have happened if she wasn't here to protect me. Their eyes were amber, bright red or glowing white, standing at different heights. It was difficult to see what they were. They slowly circled us, always keeping their distance from her, and I nearly let go. When I gazed up at an enormous beast with glowing red eyes, it towered over the tree line and flexed large clawed fingers. Its focus was on me. Its lips drew back to reveal teeth that didn't glimmer in the light. It was a creature born and embraced by shadow. More than half choose to stay. Most regret it, and find themselves in eternal suffering. She reflected, still unfazed by the creature watching us. We walked so now it was right behind us. I could feel its eyes in the back of my head. I wanted to look back at it, but had a feeling that was the wrong thing to do. It felt close, too close. I glanced over my shoulder to see a long clawed arm behind me. I drew my breath in to scream. The dread lady turned. A skeletal finger rested where her lips should have been. Was enough to silence me, and I exhaled. I didn't need to breathe. Old habits from life were difficult to stop. Some enjoy the chaos and wish to lure more people to join them. I could feel the pressure of it being behind me. I wanted to scream, to acknowledge it or something. Why didn't she push it away like she did with the dead? It lingered, and I tried to distract myself from thinking about it. How many people have you tried to take on this? I paused, considering what it would be called. Death journey? She seemed to question her answer, taking it in. I and my siblings have reaped all your kind since the beginning. When you were closer to your ancestors, I guided all those who came before, and whispered different words till they found their next life. You reaped everything? Yes. This sparked my curiosity. Even dinosaurs? I was shocked, somehow only thinking of humanity's sentience, and forgetting that other animals had theirs. Yes. I did not walk in this form. It changes depending on those who are guided. I wondered how many forms she had. Did it change for every species that was taken down this road? Why were there no ghosts of dinosaurs or other animals that had passed away? What is your original form? I don't have one. When creation happened, I was born, and someday I will reap myself. Then I will simply cease to be. Perhaps I will reawaken in a new life or role. I don't know where I will walk or if I will. Then, perhaps, I will disappear. I never thought a reaper or a goddess could simply no longer be, or be so accepting of it. I simply had to ask, why aren't there ghosts of dinosaurs or extinct species walking around? I haven't heard any tales of them. Her expression became sad. A crimson tear fell from either eye and descended down both cheeks, staining them. When the last one walked, they fell silent and went into their next incarnation. And besides, few, if any, would be able to see or hear them. It was an explanation that I didn't expect. Why was she sad about this? The loss of a species, and no longer being able to join them on their death march. It gave me more to think about. My suffering was dwarfed by all the dead who had come before, a journey that would be shared by every living creature. I don't know why. But the creature who lingered drifted off, fading away to nothing, and the weight had been lifted. In the time we have been here, have other people died? Yes, many. Time does not exist the same for me as it does for your kind. Why are you here with me rather than with them? I sensed her displeasure. The blood-stained tears disappeared from her face. Cold, bone-chilling rain poured down from the sky, and it felt good to finally feel something, even if it was unpleasant. I'm grateful you're here with me, and I don't want you to go, I added hastily. Perhaps even too much? If you're here, does that mean other people are left to linger? Not everyone wishes to go. Soldiers and parents tend to be the worst. Unwilling to leave their posts, and determined to stay to protect their families or causes. They spend their time watching them, only draining them both, ignoring my warnings until they twist and turn into something their previous selves would despise. I listened to her explain, and I was thankful that I didn't refuse her offer. Would I have been stuck with the dead who reached out for me, forever bound to that road, or to the place the car accident happened? I had so many questions about their fates, and what could have occurred. Do you always give multiple chances? No. I have a soft spot for children. I didn't expect this. The sky changed once more, from grey to red, with no sun appearing in the sky. It went from the sharp chill of the cold to blistering hot. I panted, even though I didn't need to breathe anymore. Again, she was completely immune to the elements of this strange place. I didn't know if this was her domain, or one she simply walked through. I opened my jacket and let it slide down my arms to rest at my elbows, trying to keep cool. I wanted to discard my clothing completely, but I didn't want to leave any trace of myself here. It burned my nose, mouth, and throat. I would have done anything for some water to moisten my throat. I couldn't speak. This part of the journey felt truly endless. I didn't know why I had to endure this temperature, or what purpose it held. Soon I reached a point where every step was becoming increasingly difficult. I practically hung from her hand. She dragged me along the damaged, cracked earth, and I dreaded letting her go. She didn't look down at me, or verbally check to see what was happening. I figured this was part of what happens. I focused on holding on until it passed. I closed my eyes, imagining better things during my life, and the heat faded. The relief did not last long. The fog of war surrounded us. I saw soldiers and warriors throughout history march toward their endless goals. Rotting flesh clung to their bones. Torn and weathered uniforms hung from their bodies. They had the wounds that caused their passing. Somehow they were able to move, weaponry in hand, and I wondered why they didn't move on. Why am I here? I'm no soldier or warrior, I questioned faintly, finally finding my voice. We all must pass through, she answered. I saw the first humans attack each other with stone and club, bludgeoning each other until bones cracked and organs burst. I saw and heard a knight on an endless patrol, murmuring that he must warn them. An endless quest with no end. I heard arrows being fired, the clash of shields, and weapons made of fire and disease. All purged the warrior dead, only for them to be brought back. The day went quickly. When they were injured and dying, they spoke, and briefly found peace, only to be driven into battle again. Each day renewed the cycle, their fate for all time, unknown when they would finally find rest and salvation. I wondered how many actually wanted to find peace. Some looked truly happy to be here. The next place was difficult to look. I saw victims of warfare. They ran past with their bodies on fire, their skin burning and falling off. I heard the wailing of families for their deceased or missing family members, wanting them to be returned safe and sound, only to find their corpses, or sitting and waiting endlessly for news. An endless wait that would never cease. Shadows of messengers would ride toward them, only to ignore them, or disappear at the final moment. Their wails of unknown filled my ears. Next were the children and the elderly. I had to turn away, unable to look at the horrors they had endured. It all didn't seem fair. The horrific screams, wails, battle cries all merged into one frightening sound, until we reached somewhere pleasant. The sunlight was gentle on my face, the air soft, and I opened my eyes to see a lush valley. The path was difficult to see now. The grass readily overtook it, and I wondered why anyone would want to pass through here. It was so breathtakingly beautiful. I could hear the faint sounds of birds chirping, and all I wanted was to skip off into the grass and curl up and sleep. I slowed my pace and felt the pull this time from her. "Do not linger nor slow down," she warned, a mystical growl behind her words. I was so caught up by the magic of the place that I felt my grip releasing, and she didn't tighten her grip. "I will not warn you again." It was hard to remember the pain of those strange places I had been previously. I wanted to. I know they were in pain, but this place was perfect. I want to let go, but I frowned. The blades of grass swayed and suddenly cracked like whips. The trees were distorted, pulsing, and twisted into bloated shapes, their branches becoming long, twisting arms that circled toward us. I gripped the goddess' hand tight and tried to use her body to shield myself from them. They hissed, spiraling, and circled around her. I knew they would have taken me without her. What was that? Not everything is as it seems. I dreaded what was coming up. We were surrounded by reaching hands on elongated limbs, their screaming mouths muffled by the layer of skin that coated their faces. Their open mouths and around their eyes had deep, self-inflicted scratch marks around them. There was a horde of them. They were so absorbed in their own suffering that they didn't seem to notice me. I didn't know who they were, or why they were forced to endure this fate. Every time they managed to pull one layer off, another instantly grew over the top, and the cycle looped around once more. Our journey continued. This place faded away, and soon we were floating in darkness. It was difficult to tell where things were now, since there was no light. It was impossible to gain any perspective when the environment was like this. There was no sound. The comparison to the overwhelming feelings, this place simply felt empty and void of life. The fear I felt was altered. There was no reason to be scared, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something would appear out of the black. She, however, seemed perfectly content in this world. The light of her bones and the flickering curve of her skin lit up the area around us. I expected there to be footsteps, or some sound to indicate our movement. There was none. No anger, no grief, no sadness. It simply was. Everywhere felt like time no longer existed. Yet here I wondered where I'd even come into being. I thought I heard familiar whispers, calling my name and asking me to run to them, to join them, to stop them being alone in the empty dark. I could have sworn they were my parents, my friends, my loved ones. My parents made sense because they were dead, but my friends were young. They surely wouldn't die for some time. I kept looking in the direction they were coming from, or trying to. It surrounded me. There was nothing to tell me what they were.
Please help me, daughter. Please help me, daughter. Please help me, daughter. Let us flee. What do you hear?
I gave her a quizzical look. My loved ones, my family and my friends. They're calling out to me. She regarded me quietly. I felt she desired for me to remember something. It was on the tip of my tongue, and it took me some time to recall. My mother. She's crying, and she's trapped. I need to save her. Yes. Yes. Come to us. She will come to us, guide. And you can do nothing. The voices may mislead you. She won't listen. She will be ours. They will try to lure you in. You cannot interfere with her free will. Remember? Or the truce is forever broken, and we will have free reign. She stiffened. Her grip on my hand tightened, and her eyes lowered. Dark tears formed and trickled down her cheeks, and she forced herself to maintain her usual grip on my hand. Soft, gentle, and enough for me to withdraw mine at any time. I wondered what was going through her mind. If I could ever understand it. The choice is yours. We do not stop. If you want to go to the voices, that is up to you. I didn't know what to do. My hand remained in hers, and I kept glancing around me, waiting to hear my parents and my loved ones again. They didn't speak, no matter how much I wished for them to. The emptiness called out to me, the hope of what could be. The temptation pulled at me, and this wasn't where my parents deserved to be. Surely they'll be wherever she would lead me, and not in this strange, empty void. I kept looking, letting the voices ring out, and through the whispers, I heard them. I finally heard the malicious voice through the whispering.
You are ours.
I let out a frightened scream and wanted to run. I started to run, trying to pull the goddess to go faster, and her pace remained the same. Slow, steady, and would not rush nor stop for anybody. Why didn't she understand? I slowed down to walk alongside her, even though everything inside told me to break away from her and run off into the distance to escape.
She can hear us.
I can't decide which is worse to endure, hearing the tortured whispers of my family trying to lure me in, now replaced with the growls and threats of the void. Without her there to guide me, I would have been lost, and I didn't know what my fate would have been. My soul gone, nothing but their plaything, and I wondered about where my parents were, and if they were safe. Do they have my parents? Are they here? I asked, hoping for a good answer. Your path is your own, as is theirs. Each soul must make this journey and decide for themselves. It is both your blessing and your curse. Why didn't you tell me about them? The voices. That they were lying to me. You need to use your own discernment. That wasn't comforting when they'd been wrong previously, and only at the last minute I was safe. The whispering and threats plagued me. They blurred together and suffocated me with their cruelty. Their threats toward my loved ones were unbearable. They told me what they were doing to them, and what they were going to do when they finally walked through here. I hoped my voice wouldn't be used to lure them. I wanted to warn them. I needed to warn them. I had to stop myself from worrying, letting go of the decisions they would have to make for themselves. And finally, the darkness drifted away, as though it had never been, and was a mere memory. Water surrounded us. It pooled around our feet, and instinctively I panicked as the water rose, up my calves, then around my thighs, then my waist, chest, shoulders, and I took a gasp when it reached my neck. She side-eyed me. I think she did anyway. My old living concerns were strange to her, and old habits still lingered for me. The water raised above my head. My hair swayed in the ripples of the liquid, and the fabrics of her gown waved around her. The outline of her body, A glimpse every now and then made me curious, but I didn't want to ask. I held my breath, and finally let go. I didn't need to worry. Around us I could hear the sound of the water, whale sounds as they swam above us, and light trickled down from the surface. My legs gently kicked to keep me moving forward with her, my hand not leaving hers, and I wondered about this place, the contrast of each one. I wondered whether each was a form of purgatory, a place of reflection before heaven or hell would finally be reached. A variety of sea life swam past us, both from the current time, the past, and what I imagine the future will be. A large whale, I think, began to swim in our direction. It was enormous, and could swallow several people whole in a single mouthful. She showed no signs of fear or avoiding it. She showed no signs of fear or avoidance. Therefore, what else was there for me to do but stay with her? The whale disappeared, turning to ash, and the remains drifted to the bottom of the ocean. Another test I had passed. For what purpose I was unsure of. She said nothing, and we continued until we reached a gate. These weren't the pearly gates I've been taught about. They were a rusted, chain-link gate, held together with pieces of wire, and flanked by a mixture of barb and razor wire spirals. Around it there were long twisted weeds. Then the plant life faded off into nothing. The gate looked as though it could blow away with the breeze. Was this a gate to hell? For the first time she stopped, and I did too. I looked at the gates and back at her. Is this hell? Did I not pass the tests? I asked, confused, and with a growing dread of what was to follow. Why do you think it is hell? She asked, a tilt of her head. The shift kept happening. Her fabric swayed around her and her veil faded away. The skull and skeleton temporarily removed in favor of a beautiful woman. She had her bright eyes once more, ankle-length hair, and I noticed her features changed. The faces of many women in different races blurred in front of me. How many faces had she worn while she followed her sacred duty? She rested her free hand to rest on mine, one warm with flesh, and another, the ice-cold caress of the dead. I gazed up at her in awe, the one who had guided me through all the terrors and tribulations of death, things I couldn't understand yet. It isn't what I expected. It isn't beautiful or grand. I wanted to see... I tried to grasp the right word. More. It appears different for each person, who arrives seeing something different, tied to their own hopes for the future, the lives they have led, and the ones they still need to experience. Her skeletal hand gestured toward the gate. This is up to you. Do you wish for a new life, or to rest until the end? What is the end? When all ceases to be. You will feel nothing until then. It will be as though you are asleep, and you will feel no pain when it comes. I didn't understand the offer placed in front of me. The thought of nothingness until the end didn't appeal, especially when there was no time frame offered. I wanted to experience life, the good and the bad that life had to offer. Would it mean I have to walk through where we came from again? She gave me a sad, knowing smile, and inclined her head in agreement. I didn't think I could do it again. The memory of my travel through was fading. I remembered being frightened, worried, confused. Yet there was no specific memory that stood out. Will you be the one who comes to collect me? As I have done many times before. I regarded her closely. There was a familiarity to her. All the faces were, at one point my own, shown back to me. One after another. There had to be 100 lives lived, with barely any memories from each of them remaining with me. It was reassuring to know she will be back when I passed out, even if I didn't remember her from the previous round. And the gate slowly opened with no one to do it. I then knew I had already decided. I would live another life. It is time. Her warm, human hand gradually opened palm up, with mine resting on top, and letting me decide to lift it off. I didn't know if my resolve was being tested, but I didn't care. Do I get to choose who and what I come back as? I asked, hopeful. Perhaps I would return around the same time as the rest of my loved ones. She closed her eyes, shook her head, and I knew it was up to fate. I lifted my hand. There was no great nemesis to take me, nor drag me away somewhere unsafe to feast on my soul. I looked toward the gate, then onward to my next life, and I was so grateful to her guiding me through. The idea of residing in a torturous limbo was agony. Thank you for... I looked back and she was gone, as though she was never there. There was nobody else around, and nor did I have any feelings of being watched, nor stalked by something wicked. With my courage now restored, I walked through the gate and didn't feel any different. I heard them steadily close behind me. The gate itself disappeared, and I was left to walk alone. I didn't like this part. I had gotten so used to the company that I felt naked without her. Please, please come back, I thought, on repeat in my mind. If she came back, I was sure I was safe. I was walking down a long, deep tunnel with a pin of light at the bottom. I could hear my footsteps walk toward it. I plodded along until I realized that it was working, and I was on my way. The light grew larger, and I was invigorated. I'd be able to breathe for the first time, to find new life, and perhaps I would see my loved ones all over again. I finally reached it, and a burst of light surrounded me. I stepped out and looked around. Everything was similar. The buildings mostly looked like what I remembered, but clothing was distinctively more futuristic looking, as were the cars. A couple walked past me, and I was able to get a closer look. The woman turned her hand upward to reveal a hologram of a cube as she walked. It told them how to get to some restaurant or something. They didn't seem to notice me standing there. I heard her, a weeping sound in the bushes, and saw a homeless woman, wrapped in newspapers in an effort to keep warm, her toes and fingers turning blue. I looked at the couple who ignored her existence. I reached down to hold her hands to try to warm them up. She gazed up at me with wide, horror-filled eyes, sobbed, and murmured how it was time. She needed to go. To please take her and ease her suffering. I looked at my hands and they were mortal, shifting to skeletal, and I didn't agree to this. Was it now my turn to escort her through the places I'd been? Yes, it is your time to collect. I heard her words in my mind. No! She was supposed to come and get me. I didn't have time to be concerned about this. I offered her my hand. She took a moment to consider it, and I said, "It is time. Do not let go of my hand, and come with me. I will keep you safe." Her soul rose, no longer bound to her mortal body, and began the long walk with me. The Castle Whispers. Written and narrated by Lady Spookaria. There are castle ruins near the village I live that I often go to for some tranquility. When I'm off school for the summer, it is my favourite place to spend a majority of my time, and is where I can frequently be found. Only the barest of outlines remain. The roof had long since collapsed, and the walls were jagged, the stone foundation bare to the elements. I walked along what had once been a large building, and always wondered what was beneath the earth. Nature was quick to reclaim the land for itself. The ground was coated in a thick, lush grass and other bits of vivid green foliage. I took my bag, my drawing pad, and some charcoal to sketch and relax. It was my refuge, my happy place, one I could always go to, and I had such fond childhood memories here. I don't remember a time when I didn't come here. I think I used to come here with someone. I had my favourite spot under an old tree with long twisted roots, and a large branch shaded me from the heat of the midday sun. Phone reception was pretty spotty up here, and that was part of why I enjoyed it. Technology usually didn't work for me anyway. Besides, I could have my solitude without worrying about other people contacting me out of the blue. I laid down my blanket, sit with my back against the tree, and mindlessly sketch whatever was in front of me. The sound of charcoal against the surface of the paper was soothing, and sometimes I would draw what I saw, and other things I would just imagine. There were random visitors like me who wanted to check out some of the local history, and be close to nature. There were also some of the birds and other wildlife that had made the ruins their home. Or I could draw what the castle whispered to me. My grandmother always believed that places had spirits of their own, or there were those who became adopted by the place. They would either welcome you or they would be hostile. It was important to be patient and polite with them to accept you. The reason why I believed spirits were here were the finer details of my sketches. There would be a head poking out from a window that was not there, a shadow in the wrong place, and it was by chance I heard the whispers for the first time. I relied on the natural sounds of the ruins, and the rare moments of company I'd have from other wanderers. Those who saw me tended to focus on their own moment of peace, and I was grateful. While I felt calm, I always had a feeling I was waiting for something. The rustling sound of leaves, of different birds and insects chirping, and the sound of the wind. Always the whispers were there. Sometimes I couldn't understand them, thinking they were little thoughts trickling in as my imagination took hold. I couldn't make out any of the words. All I could tell was that people were there, speaking with me. It sounded like the old phrase here and there. The voices would change between being male or female, young and old, happy and angry. I kept up with my sketches, the figures in them becoming more visible with every strike of my charcoal. Sometimes, I'd see the reflection of a man or the face of a little girl in the sketches. Daylight didn't last forever. It was getting late, and I knew I had to be heading home. I picked up my bag, and I heard it clearly for the first time.
"I'm here."
The voice was soft, delicate, and it caused me to look up from my task. The summertime meant that the light would linger for a long time, before finally the darkness of night would claim the land. I walked home down along the long dirt pathway. It was maintained enough to ensure it hadn't become overgrown, but not enough to remove the natural, unkempt edges. On the way, it felt as though the spirits were watching me, and I was the focus of their attention. Unconsciously, my steps became quicker, and I made my way home as quickly as possible. My night would be considered dull to many others. I came home to my parents, ate my favourite meal, cleaned up and soon got ready for bed. I was eager to return to the ruins again, my home away from home. I slept, without nightmares or dreams. When I woke up, I was refreshed and happy. I washed up before I walked into the kitchen, and into the aroma of a full breakfast cooking. My stomach grumbled and I began to help myself, chatting away to my mum who spoke very few words, and focused on her task of cooking. She cooked all my favourite meals, donating what we didn't end up eating and would hum my favourite lullaby. Once done, I showered, dressed, gathered my sketchbook and made my way. As I walked, I noticed people were focused on going about their daily lives, ignoring me, and that suited me just fine. It was still dawn. The morning frost still lingered on the foliage, and I was in heaven. I made my way up the desolate and silent pathway to reach my favourite destination. When I walked up the hill, I saw that I was not alone. and a person had taken my desired spot. I frowned, irritated, and looked around to find another spot that I could claim for the time I was there. Nothing felt right, and I had the urge to explore the ruins in ways I didn't do since I was young. As I walked through what used to be an old corridor, I remembered how I used to run through here as a child, with a group of the neighborhood children. We would make up stories about the lords and ladies who once lived here. We'd have epic play battles in the courtyard, and our days would be filled with happiness. I couldn't remember what happened to them all. Did they move away? I looked up. The stairs had been damaged over the torment of time and lack of maintenance. I looked at the upper levels, wishing I could climb up and see what was at the top. I'm not sure if I felt brave or foolish. I looked around to try and find a safe way up. My footsteps broke twigs and crunched leaves as I walked.
Come this way. You're really close.
I heard it this time, crystal clear and ever so faint. The voice came from around the corner, in a section I didn't remember exploring. I walked towards it and saw a weathered and fallen caution sign. The rocky wall had enough holes and protruding rocks to make it easy to climb.
Up. Go up and you will see.
The whisper came again, this time from right behind me. I jumped in surprise at the sound. It may have been foolish, but I did it. I climbed up, my bare hands on the rocks, and fortunately, enough time had passed for the frost to melt. With a groan, I pulled my body up and moved to where I guessed the support beam was beneath me. The higher view was beautiful, and I got a better view of the village that was home to me, along with the neighboring fields. I opened my backpack and took out my sketch pad, only to find there were nothing but blank pages, one after another. I flipped through them, trying to make sense of them, and came to the last couple of pages. There were broken human figures around the beautiful castle. Where had my drawings gone? I dropped the sketchbook.
You will see. You will see what happened.
I looked around, expecting to see shadows of people standing behind me, and there were none. I was alone. I felt eyes on me, watching me, and I gave an impulsive shiver. Keep climbing. We need you to see. I could only hear one voice now. All the others blurred into it. Many sources speaking through one voice. And it sounded so familiar. Almost like home. Soon I found a way up the rampart. This time it was harder to climb. A couple of times I thought my grip would fail and I'd fall. It was always in the back of my mind. I never slipped once. And soon I found the highest part. There were old nests from birds who flew away long, long ago. Cobwebs and other signs people hadn't been up here for an incredibly long time. The view from here was spectacular. I could see in all directions. I could see far, far into the horizon. I could see the distant villages and the main town nearby. I could see the mountains my family went on a family excursion many years ago. One of the best days of my life. My eyes moved to the village. I could see my house from here, and there was my mum's yellow car parked in the driveway. I saw the winding pathways and hills. Everything was green and peaceful. I smiled, feeling the breeze in the air, and almost forgot why I came here to begin with. You forgot what happened, didn't you? Did I? What exactly did I forget? I looked at the walls in hopes of finding a clue. Running my hand over the surface of the stone. There was nothing, and I kept searching. You're getting closer to the truth, the invisible voice said, and gave me no answers. I exhaled, fists clenched in agitation and turned to snap, only to see the transparent figure of a young child. I recognized her from somewhere.
Some of her facial features looked similar to my own. The way her smile was lopsided, the small flaws that made each person unique. She had a familiar bald spot in her eyebrow, a freckle or mark on the same place. She was young. She was just taller than my hip and her clothing was torn. As I studied her, I noticed her bones were twisted and broken. She raised her twisted hand towards me, and I hated that feeling. I shook my head, stepped backwards, and she didn't stop. I stumbled and let out a scream, realizing how close I was to the edge. I pushed myself forward onto my knees and heard a crack when I fell, but at least I hadn't fallen. I was breathing heavily and decided it was time for me to get down. I looked at the spectre standing in front of me. Her expression was bland. A frown on her face hinted towards sadness. "Why? Why are you doing this?" I demanded. I reached down to rub my aching knees and realized she had the same marks on her own. In a second, her face was in my own and I jumped back up. Eyes wide in fear, I stepped backward, and the last thing I saw before I was airborne was her lips silently moving. The fall felt like an eternity. I landed on my back with a loud, sharp crack, and I knew I wasn't going to make it. I coughed and I could taste blood. I tried to move my fingertips and feet, and I could, but barely. I was dying. When you die, you always imagine it being the worst possible day. But the sky was still warm, relaxing, and perhaps this was a blessing. The ghost girl, or me, stood by my side and stumbled towards me. Her back was broken. She bent down to cup my cheeks in her hands, her face close to mine, and I felt her be absorbed into me. I remembered who the other children from the village were. They all lived here hundreds of years ago, killed by disease, injury, or other fates. They could travel faster than I could, and I wanted to be like them. I wanted to keep up. I'd always been a slow runner and climber. They would whisper encouragements to me, and I managed to climb the top when I heard my father's voice. He ran from under my favorite tree when I fell, cradled me in his arms, and the only sounds emitted were his choking sobs. A parent losing their child to death. Beneath me were branches and part of the wall. My father lifted me. I had a feeling it would hurt. It should have hurt. But my body was past the point of feeling pain. I reached up and touched my father's bearded face, and they were wet with tears. He took me to our favorite tree and placed my body down. I felt the sketchbook under my fingertips. Both of our hands were marked with charcoal. And I remembered! This was the spot he took me when he was teaching me how to draw. You're not dead, I answered, realizing the truth. Life slipping away from me, and the realization sank in that my father could see ghosts. My mother couldn't see me when I passed, yet continued her old rituals to keep me part of their lives. He would come every day to wait for me, to see me, to speak to me. One last time turned into many. Time for me was different. I would forget only to remember later. He kept sobbing while I died again in his arms. My body, now in ghost form, reached up and held him before I must have run out of energy and disappeared, unable to be seen or heard by him. I watched him cry before he left. He walked down the pathway and he would return the next day. I wondered what would happen when he finally passed away. Would he return here? Or would his soul reside where he passed? I didn't know. I opened the sketchbook and it showed his view, not mine. I would draw the world through his living eyes. He could see me, and hear mine and the other children's whispers. Not that I would remember. Already, I could feel the memories slipping away, leaving me. Each time we would talk through the sketchbook. If only I remembered. Always listen to the castle whispers, even if you forget what they end up telling you.